Welcome to the Martin Bailey Photography Podcast. It's July 28, 2014, and this is episode 432. The times they are a-changin', and today I'd like to relay my thoughts about a recent chain of events compared to how I know I would have reacted years ago, and why I think it's so important to adapt to the current state of the photography industry and adjust our perception of the real value of our images. To give you a little background, last week a friend on Twitter congratulated me on a blog post that, when I checked, was full of my photographs from Antarctica, but I'd not heard about this post until I was congratulated about it. My initial knee-jerk reaction was that my images had been stolen, which happens a lot, but over the years, what this means to me has changed drastically. Probably as recently as 8 or 9 years ago, I would have emailed the person that posted the article and demanded payment for the usage or removal of the post and/or images. As the years progressed though, if there was no obvious commercial connection, I might have been more likely to ask for a link back to my website in recognition, but it still probably wouldn't have been a pleasant interaction. I read the text on the post, and I'll put links in the blog post for this if you want to go over to mbp.ac/432. There'll be links and a few photos in the blog post. But I read the post on a site called featureshoot.com, and it was well written, it credited me for the work, and linked back to my website. On closer inspection, I noticed that all of the images linked back to my offset stock library, and I realized that there was probably some legitimate connection, so I mailed my contact at Offset and asked if she knew anything about it. Within minutes, I received a reply from the kind folks at Feature Shoot explaining what had happened, and it turns out that Offset have an agreement with Feature Shoot to help spread the word about their artists, and it was my turn. Now, I would have preferred to have been alerted to this before the post was published, and in fact they had some images that were referenced from Iceland, despite the post being about Antarctica, and I could have helped them to avoid that. But these sort of posts are being hammered out at an amazing pace these days, and being able to check posts in advance is becoming less and less possible, so that wasn't such a big deal. Here's the thing though, at this point in time, I instantly recognized that the post was a great marketing vehicle, with all legit links, and so my initial communication was not confrontational. Even when I didn't know what was going on, I just asked if Offset knew about this and got a professional reply within minutes. Years ago, I would have been all over these people like a rash, and then had to back down and apologize when I realized it was all legit. In fact, I'd say that the pace of things has changed so much that years ago this wouldn't have even happened without contacting me first, but that's kind of beside the point. The point is that we need to understand that things have changed. Years ago, every use had to be paid for or legitimized in some way, and when that didn't happen, tempers got frayed. Now though, there are literally millions of websites with great content being shared constantly, and everyone is fighting for the valuable eye time of visitors. The value has shifted completely from paying for the photograph to paying for eye time with your photographs. I can imagine a thought pattern years ago that probably would have gone something like, I worked really hard to make those images and deserve compensation for their use. Well, guess what? The guys at Feature Shoot have worked really hard to build an audience that trusts them and watches out for new posts on their site too. The fact is that every site that gets more than a handful of visits a day has to work really hard for that privilege. Another possible benefit for me and for Offset, of course, is that there's a chance that in this situation, someone checking out the Feature Shoot article might actually go and license one of my images. or at least be on their way to remembering my name, which has marketing value too. They say that people have to see your name at least 3 times before they might remember it. Just having people remember your name has a huge benefit. It turns out too that Feature Shoot is being checked out and syndicated by other sites, and my work was picked up and ran on a number of other very influential sites. The marketing effect was starting to snowball. The next thing I knew, My Modern Met was running the story with my photos. Shortly after, I started to hear from friends from all around the world, and again, congratulating me on the article. It was as though everyone expected that I'd worked really hard to get onto these sites, when the reality is that I had nothing to do with it. In fact, it was from the snowball effect and the kindness of the folks at Offset that I was getting all of this exposure, and it gets better. Over the following 24 hours, I received emails from 3 very high volume sites that wanted to run this article with some new photographs. Again, years ago, my immediate reaction would have been to ask how much they were willing to pay. Now my knee-jerk reaction is, wow, it would cost me a fortune to try to get that kind of exposure otherwise. You see how all of this has flipped around? One of the 3 emails resulted in my images being run on the Gizmodo Sploid sites worldwide. Gizmodo has vast numbers of visitors. I'm not going to say exactly how many because I don't know if this information that I received was confidential or not, but it's a good 9-figure number, and that's incredible exposure. Now, I'm not going to mention the names of the other 2 sites because I'm still working with them, so A, I don't want to jinx that communication, and B, it would be embarrassing if this didn't happen. So, I'm not sure whether or not it's going to come through, but I am sure that you can grasp how excited I am by the prospect, as collectively we would be talking about possible exposure to around probably 40 million viewers worldwide. Can you imagine how much it would cost to pay to market yourself for that to that many people? Discussing the amount required to license an image to sites like these in today's photography industry, where everyone is clamoring for exposure, has pretty much become a non-issue. It's now irrelevant. The websites know the value that they bring to the photographer, and the point is not even raised. Don't get me wrong here though. I'm not saying that it's no longer less necessary to license photography. There is still a strong market for licensing stock photography and assignment photography. The amount required to license images has plummeted and royalty-free is becoming the norm, but we can't change that. The only decision that you have to make now, that we have to make now, is whether or not you want in or out. I joined Offset because they offer quality photography to their customers at a price point that works for me. It's not the old stock image pricing, but it's good enough, and I'm happy to sell my images through them, and that revenue stream is now helping to pay the rent. Another reason is that Offset are selling my images that weren't really stock images to start with. If you want to sell a lot of stock photography, you really have to shoot stock photography. And I don't mean this in a derogative way. There are people making good livings as stock photographers, and they are very imaginative and creative people, setting up scenes that they know will sell, and working hard at their craft, and that's what you have to do to sell stock imagery. My photos are shot first and foremost for me. I'm trying to create fine art, nature, landscape and wildlife work, and having a company like Offset to help me market that is incredible. Sure, they take a cut, but they work hard for that cut. Now, when people come to me with a request to license a specific image, I just point them to that image on Offset. I could draw up a license and negotiate a price directly, but Offset have all of this in place, so I figure that the cut that they take, even when I could have made a direct sale, is the cost of outsourcing my licensing to a third party. Now, if you've followed this podcast for a while, you may remember a post that I did way back in October 2005 called Don't Give Away Your Art. This was the old Martin 2005. But I want to stress the importance of putting all of this into context. The uses I've mentioned today so far are incredibly valuable, and I'm more than happy to give up my images in exchange for that exposure. But there will be times when people will ask for your images and the reverse is true. Not all sites have millions of regular visitors. In fact, very few do. Many people will ask to give them your art in exchange for a link back to your site, when the truth is their site isn't getting more than a handful of visitors a day, and they need your image to build that site up. The value of your image to them in this situation is far greater than the value of having your image on their site. In this situation, it's your choice as to how you proceed. I've allowed non-commercial use of my images and done interviews, for example, with sites that I know have very few visitors, because I like to help out when I can and when I've got the time to do so. I am where I am today in part because of the kindness of people that helped me out along the way, and I'll continue to need that help without doubt. So kindness and generosity should be a continuously two-way street, in my opinion. As much as I try to help, though, another trend that I'm starting to see is I'm starting to get a lot of requests for stories in return for publicity. I get these emails maybe once or twice a week now, and I've started to get picky about who I'll work with, out of necessity. I literally don't have the time to work with everyone that contacts me, so I have to prioritize. If someone offers me free publicity, the first thing I do is go and check out their website. You can usually see at a glance if they have a good readership or not. You can tell by the quality of other images that have already been posted if they're being trusted by other photographers worth their salt, and checking out how many comments their posts get is another telltale sign. If you can't make up your mind based on a look at their site, generally now I just ask them straight for their visitor numbers. Quite often they'll have fewer visitors than I'm already getting, and although they would be different eyeballs to the ones that visit my site, we only have a finite amount of time to work on all of the things that we have to do, so you have to make a decision. It's a lot of work to select images and write a story that represents you well, so you really have to think about whether it's worth your time or not. So if you get asked for this sort of thing, if you feel it's worth it, go for it and hit it out of the park with your story and images. Otherwise, politely excuse yourself and walk away from the negotiation. So to bring this full circle, there are a few points that I hope I'm getting across here. If you are trying to make a living or even just some gear money from your photography, be very careful with your communication if you should find your images online. It's becoming more and more common for people to use your images and tell you later, or not tell you at all, but that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. I would have been very embarrassed and probably wasted some very valuable opportunities over this last week if I'd approached this turn of events as Martin 2005. The world has changed and values are shifting and dynamic. It's becoming more and more important to see various situations for what they are, evaluate what value the situation has for you, and carefully decide how to proceed. I generally find that being polite and personable at all times leaves the best impression. If a conversation with someone over this sort of thing starts to turn rotten, I just walk away from the thread midstream. I'd rather just not reply than try to make the other person understand why they're being an ass. And remember that them being an ass might only be your current view of that person, so you only make matters worse by trying to point that out to them. If they really are an ass, then they won't come around to your way of thinking anyway. I have hundreds of positive tasks to work on at any given time, and life's too short to bicker with people, even if you know you're right. No amount of trying to put the world to rights is going to make a difference, so you don't do yourself any favors by sowing seeds of negativity. Be nice, and generally nice things will happen to you. As they say, what goes around comes around. Before we finish for today, I'd like to just remind you that I'm running another Pixels to Pigment in-studio workshop here in Tokyo on August 23-24. So if you are in town then, I'd love to see you. For details and to book your space, please visit the Pixels to Pigment page at mbp.ac/p2p, P number 2P. Thanks very much for listening today. Remember that you can find me on Google Plus and Twitter and Facebook, and links to everything that I'm up to are at martinbaileyphotography.com, so do drop by and take a look. I'll be back next week with another episode, but in the meantime, you take care and have a great week, whatever you're doing. Bye bye.